Welcome to 2021 Big Ten Media Day from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Andrew Lind here on Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. Day one of two for the Big Ten Media Days. And for a day that did not feature any Ohio State coaches or players, easily the biggest anticipated draw of the day, Andrew, was the opening State of the Union in the Big Ten, if you will, from Commissioner Kevin Warren. And then obviously Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines spoke at the end of day one. And frankly, today was a day that I think had a lot of hype and then maybe had a lot of the air let out of the balloon. Kevin Warren had a chance to make some real statements and didn't. I don't want to say he dodged questions. He just chose not to really answer much. He said he wasn't going to change his mind on anything he did last year. If he could do it over again, he'd have made the same choices. And I know that probably aggravates some fans. And then obviously at the end of the day here, Michigan gets up there and the elephant in the room, they haven't beaten Ohio State in what feels like a decade now. And, suddenly the Wolverines are trying to take this rivalry more seriously. So I think those are kind of the two themes we walk away from here on day one.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to Warren, this is really his first opportunity to talk to the media in general and be in a position like that since the pandemic started. And to sit there and talk for 30, 35 minutes on end about, at one point, you didn't even know what he was talking about. So to avoid the questions for that long, and then once you are asked questions, you deflect about realignment, you deflect about the role that the Big Ten had in canceling the season when you could have accepted responsibility for it and say, hey, we screwed up, we didn't do what everybody else did. And instead he says he doesn't regret anything of it. And that was a real surprise.
I guess I'm not surprised to hear him try to put a positive spin on it. There's some level of, he gets that 45 minutes to say what he wants to say. And he wanted to control the message. I don't blame him for taking that chance. That's fine. What else did you expect? But by the same token, I guess I was a little frustrated not to hear him, maybe express a little bit more concern over the way the communication, broke down last year. He did reference, and I'm trying to be fair to him, he did reference that, that is the one component to what happened last year that he wishes things may have gone better on. He would have communicated things a little bit differently. He just said he would have arrived at the same decisions. And love it or hate it, I guess we don't have any way to, go back and change his mind on things. But I felt like this was a chance for maybe him to give fans a little bit of closure for what, last year's chaotic just mess was. And then, have the Big Ten take a real leadership stance moving forward in college football. I'm not sure it was totally perceived that way.
Well, and I think that that's a big part of it too, because if he sits there and he says, I have no regrets for how it was handled last year. Well, you can't look back on something that the totality of it and how it actually went and how it was resolved and say that, you have that hindsight. You can't look back and say, well, I wouldn't have changed this, because you absolutely would have. And I would respect him so much more if he would have actually come out and said, hey, we would have done this differently had we known this. And instead just to say, oh, well, we wouldn't. I mean, that if I'm being honest, that's a lie. And then it's on top of that, it's pretty much a slap in the face to everybody who was involved, because you're talking about the parents who he said manufactured a letter. You're talking about the fans who didn't know whether their team was going to play every week or not. It really is just a slap in the face to those people involved. And then, that's getting into the realignment aspect of it, as Texas and Oklahoma are potentially making a power play move to go to the SEC. He could have answered some questions like that and say, hey, how are we going to make the Big Ten a destination conference for these schools? How are we going to make the Big Ten better? And instead he said, well, we'll just kind of address that when, at a later time.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting, right? Not really the storyline everybody expected to be coming out in college football yesterday, with Texas and Oklahoma reportedly showing some interest in leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC. perhaps it caught him off guard, and maybe he just wasn't prepared to answer that kind of a question. But to your point, I guess I would have preferred to see something a little bit more forward thinking as it relates to the Big Ten, and in what ways could conference be stronger. The fact of the matter is, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but his counterparts at some of these other leagues have not been afraid to take stances to kind of like plant their flag in the ground in the SEC, in the Big 12, in the ACC, and give their opinion on things. Is that really the job of the commissioner? I guess I don't know if that's in his job description, but he certainly has the power to do it. And perhaps some of this was, the lawyer within him, trying not to step too far out of bounds. But I guess I just would have liked to see a little bit more from him today in that regard.
Yeah, and I can't say that I would ever look back and say that there was a day that I would want Jim Delaney still as a conference commissioner, especially after he was somebody who a couple years ago said that, he would quit before players would ever be paid. So, I mean, everybody kind of has their issues, if you will. But at the same time, like, if you're in that position and with as progressive as college football is becoming with NIL, conference realignment, the expanded playoff, all of that stuff, you would really expect somebody to, at a Big Ten institution, leading the Big Ten institutions, to come out and say, this is the path forward that we're going to have. We are, the standard in college football. We're going to continue to be the standard in college football, and this is how we're doing it. And I don't see that at all from Kevin Warren.
There was definitely a part in the beginning of his discussion today with the media that felt very presidential, if you will. It kind of felt like a State of the Union, talking about how strong the conference is in lots of its different sports, referencing a couple national championships that the conference brought in, obviously not in football. Talking about the success of, the student athletes within the classroom and a lot of the things you would expect a commissioner to say, but it felt like a giant filibuster to me. He had 45 minutes and wanted to make sure that he said the things he wanted to say, and didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions that perhaps, frankly, he didn't want to answer, but that people were dying to ask him. So, I wrote this, Andrew, and I guess deep in my heart, I feel it. If you're a Buckeye fan, it's kind of time to move on from the frustrations from what you might feel from the conference office, because the reality right now is that this team, at least on paper and over the last, several years now, winning the conference title 4 years in a row, they're so far ahead of the rest of the league that your perception of the conference office, I don't think that should weigh into what you think about Ohio State football or what you think about the Big Ten right now, because until somebody knocks them off, the Buckeyes right now are on the mountaintop. And, we're standing right now on a field where they have played every December and come out on top. And at the end of the day, that's goal number one for them: win the Big Ten.
I definitely agree with you from the initial standpoint of that. It definitely is something that you want to separate your frustration with the conference offices as an entity versus your frustration with the conference on the football field, because obviously Ohio State has no peer when it comes to that. So if you can separate those two things, and you're going to say to yourself, okay, well, this is just another formality, another year, another Ohio State being the Big Ten favorite. And that was another issue that I had really with Kevin Warren's thing, is that he didn't make it about Big Ten football. I mean, that's why you're there. That's why you're on the football field at Lucas Oil Stadium. Not because Michigan won a women's gymnastics national title this year, and he doesn't need to speak about that in his 45 minutes. Like, to me, that just felt like a waste of time. So, if we want to talk football, if he wants to talk about what the conference is doing currently with a team that just played in the national championship, with a team that is in the playoffs, 4 out of 6 years, like, if you want to talk about that stuff, let's go ahead and talk about it. But to sit there and act like you have no plan moving forward, to me, that's an issue. And I don't think that Ohio State fans or Big Ten fans in general should just move on from that, because, to be honest, if they want the product on the field to continue to be at an elite level, especially Ohio State, you want somebody who's in charge of a conference who is going to lead you into an elite, network. So, it's just kind of one of those frustrations that I think until he comes out and says that, he wants to move forward and find a way forward with the conference, or, or somebody eventually takes over for him, we're not going to really get a definitive answer for that. Just like we didn't, in the 45 minutes from him today.
Well, and to your point, even the immediate future, take playoff expansion out of the question, because he kind of, quickly sidestepped that question too. He made it sound like, in August, each of the schools around the league will have essentially put forth their proposals on how they would want to handle COVID-related situations this year. And, at that point, they'll combine it all, figure it out, and then come up with a conference-wide solution for the season. So we don't even know how things are going to be handled. Would it be a forfeit if a team can't play a game because of a COVID outbreak of some kind? There are parts of our society that are starting to normalize that lead you to believe that shouldn't even be a thought. But the reality is it still could be. So, we don't even have answers yet on COVID protocols across the conference, but would expect those to come out soon. Let's topic shift here for a moment now to Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, who, it was his typical self when he was up on the podium today. I think a lot of Ohio State fans were happy to find out that Coach Harbaugh is going to stay in Ann Arbor, or at least that's what the that's what the contract says. Obviously, there's a significant dollar figure change after this upcoming season, but by all accounts, he's going to be in Ann Arbor for a bit. A couple of his players that are here have spoken, pretty authoritatively on, really trying to take this rivalry a little bit more seriously. They couldn't really pinpoint an exact reason why. I think it probably has to do with the reality check of the last two times these two teams met. Things didn't go well. And then obviously this past fall for Michigan in general, even without playing Ohio State, it was a pretty ugly season. So sometimes when you get embarrassed a little bit, you got to find a way to pick yourself back up. And that's the only thing I can really point to, that they probably aren't going to quite say like that publicly.
Yeah, I think Michigan is in an interesting situation because, and I've said this a long time, that it has to do everything with Ohio State was trying to catch Michigan in the first place. Like, Michigan opened the rivalry on an insane win streak to begin. And Ohio State from that point always wanted to be exactly what Michigan was. And then recently they've surpassed that. They've become everything and more that Michigan ever wanted to be. And until Michigan is able to sit there and say to themselves, like, we're not great, we're not this aura that Michigan football is, and allow themselves to be beat down and finally say something and say, we're going to do something about this, that they will finally be able to possibly, push things back in their direction. They obviously have to recruit first. Ohio State has been recruiting ridiculously the last couple of years, so there still is a gap there. But they're finally starting to take those steps, like the sign in their facility that says, what are you doing to beat Ohio State today? They're not having red Gatorade in the facility. Like, those little things might seem like a joke, but those kind of things add up. And I think that it's finally starting to happen where Michigan cares as much about the rivalry as Ohio State is trying to, but it's still not going to be enough. And Harbaugh is not going to be there long enough to make any impact in that direction anyway.
Well, and look, even if the rivalry flips, in the next year or two, even if Michigan does come up with a victory, to your point, the talent gap on rosters right now is pretty wide, and it's going to take them, in my opinion, a couple recruiting cycles to kind of catch up a little bit. I mean, Ohio State's got more 5-star players on their roster than the rest of the conference does combined, and that goes back now like a decade. I mean, it's somewhere along the way, you've got to come up with wins on the recruiting side. And we could talk about, the expectations for Ohio State given their recruiting prowess at another time. But, I guess I'm glad to see Michigan is taking the rivalry more seriously. It's kind of sad that we have to say that kind of thing because, I would have expected and thought that the way Ohio State felt about Michigan was the same way Michigan was supposed to have felt about Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh even stood on the podium today, and when he was asked about the rivalry, he said Michigan State's our rival, but that they were working, to try to get to the mountaintop to beat Ohio State. And it just, to me, it came across in a strange way that, on one hand, what's he supposed to say? On the other hand, referencing that Michigan State's the rival felt a little deflected.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to my point, though, is that they've never viewed Ohio State as the same way that Ohio State has viewed Michigan, and that has everything to do with why the rivalry is the way that it is now. So if Harbaugh wants to focus on Michigan State, he wants to win that. He's only 500 against Michigan State, so he might as well get his win somewhere because he's certainly not getting it against Ohio State anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. So day 2 will maybe be a little bit more Ohio State heavy. Coach Day and Thayer Munford will be here. Zach Harrison will be here, which should be really interesting. Typically, you don't see a non-senior here for the Buckeyes, but Zach Harrison will be here. And there was a bit of a last-minute change, but we were told, no problems, no injuries, nothing like that. Chris Olave is no longer coming. Instead, it'll be Jeremy Ruckert to attend Media Day tomorrow. We didn't get any more information on that, but have no reason to think that there's anything wrong with Chris Olave, just Jeremy coming instead. So looking forward to visiting with them tomorrow and hearing what Coach Day has to say. And hopefully it'll be a fun and productive Ohio State heavy day on Friday here at Big Ten Media Days. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to the players that are going to be there tomorrow, it'll be a very unique thing that we haven't really been able to talk to these players. Last year, you obviously had Zoom, but it wasn't an in-person thing, and it'll be very nice to see their individual personalities. I know Thayer is a great kid, Jeremy's a great kid, and Zach's a great kid. So all of those are definitely going to come out of them tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Really excited to see how that all goes tomorrow, and perhaps the anticipation for tomorrow's day will actually live up to the hype with Coach Day and company. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick for Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated and from Lucas Oil Stadium, where Ohio State certainly hopes that it will end its 2021 into 2022 season, because both the Big Ten Championship and the College Football Playoff National Championship game are being played in this building in January. We'll talk to you again tomorrow here on Buckeyes Now.